Government says a recent study that's detected hormone-disrupting chemicals in some menstrual products does not warrant a recall.
Health Minister Dr Aaron Motsoaledi says the investigations have not found any harmful effects from the levels of hormone-disrupting chemicals in sanitary pads and panty liners, which are sold in the country. He addressed a briefing by the Social Protection Cluster in response to the University of the Free State study. Zolwa Sholwana was listening in and joins us now live. Now, Zolwa, the minister did say that there is no cause for worrying. Did he talk about what the effects are for long-term use?
Well, Bumi, from what we heard from the minister and, of course, some scientists and authorities that were here, they assured women in South Africa that there is nothing to worry about and said the chemical that was found in sanitary products by a research that was conducted by the University of Free State, a research that took about 3 years, does not necessarily prove that, that chemical will cause any harm. And that is because that is a chemical that is found in almost anything. It could be your lipstick, it could be the food that we eat, it could be on our gadgets. So this is not a harmful chemical, according to what experts have said. And you would understand that when the findings of the University of Free State, were presented to the media or were out there, this caused a lot of anxiety amongst women, young and the old in South Africa, with them essentially saying that the brands that are mentioned there are the brands that many or millions of South Africans are using. And when you think about Nompumelelo, there aren't a lot of alternatives. But let's get a reaction from a consumer who was listening in the briefing and try and find out if what was said by the minister and, of course, some of the officials here, kind of put her in a position of not having anxiety as she had when she entered this room. Ma'am, thank you very much for your time. When you arrived here, I'm sure you had anxiety and you were worried about what was going to be said rather in the briefing, understanding that when the news came out, women in South Africa were quite worried about the effects of this, chemical that was found. After hearing the minister and other officials, how do you feel now?
After hearing the minister and the other experts explaining to us that there is actually nothing to worry about, it makes me have a little bit of ease. So as a young girl, I'd like to speak on behalf of other young girls and to say that the fear, it seems like it will be reduced. But I also feel like there are some other things that can be done in order to reduce the fear. Maybe the products that will be distributed to the schools have clear transparency to see that, okay, 1, 2, 3 isn't there, 1, 2, 3 isn't there. Because a lot of young girls, after hearing that there's EDCs in the sanitary pads, they started going crazy. So in order to reduce the fear, maybe they can deliver a public statement to say that, okay, with the study that had to be done, this is something that has been long going. Like it has always been something that has been there in millions of years, that not only in your sanitary pads, but in your lipsticks, in your clothes, in everything, and that EDCs don't only affect women, but they also affect men. So these are the things that we can try to look at in order to balance and to reduce the fear that we have, yes.
Mm-hmm. And of course, at this moment, you want to, you demand some sort of transparency from government, as we understand that research is still ongoing. This doesn't end here. Would you want them to take you through the process of other findings, if there are any, from this point?
Yes, I feel like we're supposed to know everything about the other findings because I feel like right now, as young girls, let me speak on behalf of the school learners. The school learners just heard the statement from the UFC, the University of Free State, where else they didn't hear from the other side. So I think the minister, the government, what they can do is try to bring us with as the...
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time. That is a consumer there. And we will be joined shortly by the Deputy Minister in the presidency for women and youth and persons with disability. Minister, thank you very much for your time. You were one of the first officers to reach out to the university when you heard about these findings, and hearing officials, scientists, experts assuring, South African women that there is nothing to worry about. How do you feel about that?
Listen, I think it's quite important. As a ministry, we are overseeing the National Sanitary Implementation Framework. And that also speaks to what products are distributed in South Africa and whether they are meeting the standards. And that's why we immediately reached out to the university to say, come present and brief us. We assembled a team of technical experts, including the very same regulatory bodies, to come listen to the presentation and interpret this report for ourselves. Because you can understand that our responsibility lies with guaranteeing the dignity and the health and wellness of South African women and girls in this regard that relates to sanitary products. And if there's doubt that has ever been created, it needs to be communicated. If there are issues that associates to exposure to risk, we assemble everybody. And that's why you have Department of Health. That's why you've got the Department of Trade and Industry that brings all other regulatories. So it gives us relief as well that the team assembled had analyzed the report, have called experts, and we are informed to know that South Africans, there shouldn't be any panic. There shouldn't be any fear. We are continuing to work. This doesn't stop here with this communication. The technical team that we have coordinated as the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disability will continue. One, to ensure that the reports that were developed throughout to get to this point still are communicated to the public. But secondly, we've got an opportunity to educate and re-educate the public about the usage of products, about exposures and vulnerability. And this team of collective under this government administration will continue doing the work.
Mm-hmm. And moving forward, Deputy Minister, what do you think should be done to ensure that we don't have a situation of this kind where there's information that is put out there that will lead to a lot of women now living anxiously, because these products that were mentioned are brands that millions of women that use in South Africa, and there are very few alternatives if one gets to think about them.
Yeah. Listen, as government, we are not going to shield any manufacturer or distributor for that matter. All those manufacturers must meet the standards. That's the most important thing. And regulatory bodies that we have in the country have got that level of capacity to continue with their work. That's number one. Number two is that we want products that are produced not to be harmful towards South Africans. And that's why the protection of the public, the protection of users, it's at central, and the dignity is quite important. But the last point I want to really mention in terms of dissemination. You have a higher institution of learning that disseminated information. But I think we must simplify these things, because if you leave it with a context that there's a prolonged or a long-term kind of consequences, but without testing it from a clinical point of view and so forth. So you must also articulate the limitation of these studies so that those who are receiving this information, they are able to not necessarily misinterpret the information. So the study was in its infancy, and you can already see that it was not subjected to other elements which scientists have spoken about. But what we want is that when you disseminate facts, disseminate information that is packaged, even for the public, laymen can actually articulate it. But what we want really, South Africans must be able to allow institutions to communicate information better. You cannot accept that social media influencers and so forth can just draw on one thing and create a panic like that. We are a government that is responsible, a government that protects South Africans, and that's exactly what we will do, is to communicate the correct information and guarantee that dignity.
Deputy Minister, thank you very much for your time. That is the Deputy Minister of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities in the Presidency, Mapaseka Litsike, taking us through the processes that were followed leading us to this point, as you would understand, Bumi, that as soon as news came out that there were findings by the University of Free State, different government officials had to put their heads together so that they can consult relevant authorities such as clinical experts, scientists, and regulatory bodies to ensure that they give South African women assurance that there is nothing to panic about and there is nothing to worry about. As in the past few weeks, many women were talking about alternatives in terms of sanitary products that they're using. As I have mentioned, that the brands that were mentioned were, one of the most used or the top used brands when it comes to sanitary products in South Africa. Back to you in studio.
All right, Zolwa Sholwana there, just reflecting on that briefing where government is allaying any fears to women of cancer-causing chemicals in sanitary towels and panty liners that they use.